Today I'm going to talk about how I am experiencing Johnny Depp's testimony. I did manage to listen to quite a lot of it and the testimony is fascinating. Really pleased to be able to have such good access to that. I made some notes the first time that I did the original video, which was 2 days ago. I was thinking that perhaps Johnny couldn't forgive himself for leaving his first wife, and that's why he wanted to stay in such a toxic relationship with Amber Heard. But now that I've heard his childhood experiences, he has had a severe amount of adverse childhood experiences, so I think that he's just as traumatized as Amber is, and we can kind of listen to what he's saying about his upbringing, the way that his mum treated him. Sounds like his dad was quite passive and there was a codependent relationship there between the abuser, which was Johnny's mum, and the enabler, which is Johnny's dad. And unfortunately this has left Johnny with an unconscious belief that home is supposed to feel like a toxic, volatile space. And we can see that the first marriage that he has, where it's pretty healthy, you know, like there might have been some issues. He also perhaps had his drug and alcohol issues that he needed to deal with, and also fame on top of that. But he had a successful fatherhood, like he was also a husband and he had been married for a number of years. He had children who were not babies anymore, and then he left that, so he exited what would be considered to be like a, you know, healthy, loving home for somebody who was already married to a woman and who was showing him signs of affection, which were like doting on him and giving him more affection than what he perhaps was used to in his equal partnership with his first wife. And so we can see how he was lured into the second marriage by Amber's overly affectionate, what you might consider to be like a love bombing kind of phase. And the point that I really wanted to stress was that he left what was a healthy home to chase after something that was perhaps a little bit more exciting, maybe a little bit more toxic, maybe a little bit more unhealthy, and perhaps he was chasing somebody who would allow him to express his toxic side, somebody who would allow him to descend into his non-righteous, non-fatherhood, non-role model, non-healthy adult male, and he went into a relationship that allowed him to express his pain from his upbringing, that he perhaps hadn't dealt with, that trauma he hadn't healed. And when he was with Amber, we can hear from what he said in the testimony that quite a lot of his alcohol and drug abuse was because of the relationship rather than because he wanted to party. So found that really interesting, and I hope that you listen to some of the testimony and try to use this as a great example of somebody who is suffering deeply from their unconscious parents who had a destructive influence in his childhood, leaving him psychologically damaged and vulnerable to other people, toxic relationships in his adult life, and perhaps easily lured in by what might have felt like unconditional love, but in the end turned out to be a codependent relationship. He mentioned that he stayed as long as he did because his dad stayed, and that was just, you know, that's exactly what we'd expect him to go through if he is a product of his generational trauma and generational patterns. We don't know what his dad's issues are, but we know that from Johnny's testimony that his dad stayed in what seems like a very toxic relationship for him as well, and didn't say very much. He didn't stand up for the children and didn't stand up for himself. You know, some of us have good understanding of what that feels like, to have to be quiet if we're in a toxic, unhealthy relationship, because sometimes you just want to wait until it all blows over instead of standing up for yourself and imploding the whole relationship. However, that puts you into the category of an enabler. You are encouraging that person's behaviour, and so unfortunately when there's children involved, this is what we really need to pay attention to. That isn't space for toxic, unhealthy, abusive parents to get away with it just because they happen to be married to somebody who doesn't have the confidence and the strength to fight against it. One of the things that a lot of victims of child abuse feel when they grow up into adults is, why didn't my other parent protect me? And this is a really good question to ask yourself. If you are in a toxic relationship, would your children look back on these times and wonder why you didn't protect them? So if you are the healthy, loving, compassionate, conscious parent, and you perhaps are in a situation where your partner or your spouse sometimes or often create situations which would be looked back on by your children when they're older as moments of abuse and destructive behaviour, that perhaps you might need to ask yourself whether you are enabling your partner's behaviour by allowing them to continue to get away with their destructive, abusive, volatile, whatever it is, perhaps their own issues that are getting in the way of being a parent. So really interesting case. I am very much enjoying watching the testimony. I'm so glad that it's available for all of us to see on YouTube, as much as that must be very difficult for them to have to air so much of their private life. But you know, we're really getting a fantastic insight into the archetype of a toxic relationship. Like, it's just everything that could be toxic about it is. And when you start to look at the upbringing, you can just filled with compassion and understanding that this isn't anybody's fault. It's just all a product of what they've known and what they've experienced, and unconscious patterns are exactly that. They're unconscious. There's no one's in control of them. No one's trying to be in toxic relationships. No one's trying to be oppressive or addicted or harmful or physical. It's just they perhaps haven't learned how to deal with their inner world well enough yet. And sometimes we lose control, sometimes we are our own worst enemy, and sometimes we feel victimized by our own existence. So once we are aware that this is to do with unconsciousness, and once we are aware what unconsciousness really means, then we can start to work on ourselves if we want to, if we're ready to evolve, if we're ready to change. But unfortunately it causes some discomfort, and a lot of people will be unwilling to make that change and make that move towards healthy, loving relationships. So, you know, don't be surprised if people dig their heels in, because unconsciousness is actually, it's the slippery slope downwards, but it's just what you're used to. That's what home feels like, and that's where comfort lies. So the conscious path, the healthy path, the unconditional love, the unconditional compassion is all uncomfortable, especially for people who've grown up in toxic environments. It's uncomfortable, and we have to be compassionate to their journey, that they aren't going to find it easy to evolve. They're going to self-sabotage and destroy all their hard work as often as they are allowed to, because the trauma doesn't really go away. It doesn't go anywhere. You're just constantly aware of, you're just constantly like fighting against it. You're just constantly trying to be conscious and be aware of yourself, and that those sort of shadows appear repeatedly, often, and quite regularly when things are going well. Yeah, that's the thing as well. Like, as soon as things are going great for people who unconsciously desire the comfort of toxicity, where perhaps they don't feel so ashamed or unworthy, then they will perhaps self-sabotage when they are in that healthy environment, when things are going good, when everything's perfect. You know, it's just too good to be true, and then the self-destructive nature comes from the shadows. It appears out of nowhere and starts to pull the carpet out from underneath. And I think that's what has happened here with Johnny's first marriage, where things were perhaps way better than what he was used to, way better than he thought it could be and should be and that he deserved. And so he was waiting for an opportunity to implode the family and the first marriage. So, you know, keep in touch with the highlights. I think it's really fascinating. There'll be a lot of unconscious patterns that you might be able to pick up. Let me know in the comments if you agree, if you disagree, if you have any thoughts about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case, the court case. I'd really love to hear it, and if you're watching along, let me know, because we could definitely have a little discussion if anybody's you know, open to sharing their opinions and their thoughts on what's going on. So thanks very much for watching today. Just a little update from me, and what I wanted to show you was that unconsciousness that is passing down from, perhaps through the maternal bloodline, from Johnny Depp's mum to Johnny, and from what it sounds like, some of his siblings as well. So speak to you guys soon. Keep in touch on YouTube, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks everyone, bye.